Well, Rachel, we had to hop on midweek because we talked about what could happen in the playoffs, except for one scenario. And of course, that's exactly what did happen. We're going to talk about the week that was, the end to the regular season, and of course, who you will see in the PWHL playoffs.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, part of the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On NHL channel. Thanks for making us your first listen among women's hockey for the day. My name is Erica L. Ayala alongside Rachel Donner. We are your co-hosts, and we are here to talk about the end to the PWHL regular season number 2, which of course means that we're also going to talk about the playoffs. But first, Rachel, we'll do what we always do. It's a vibe check time. How you living?
I'm trying to imagine this world of the PWHL playoffs without Hillary Knight and Erin Frankel, but here we are.
Here we are indeed. I'm just here for, Minnesota of all places, holding it down as the lone standing U.S. team. And they happen to be in Central Time. So I'm really excited for that playoff matchup. But I also am excited because we are actually going to do a live stream. Our first ever live stream for the Women's Hockey Report is going to be Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9:30 Central for those who are also on Central. And we are just super excited. We know that we usually have our recording ready for you on Saturday, but since there's a game Friday night, we want to make sure we're coming fresh on Saturday. So we're going live. Make sure you join us. If you're not already subscribed, now is the perfect time because you can subscribe to the Locked On NHL channel and then also set your notifications. So once we schedule our episode, our live stream for Saturday, you will get a notification. All right, Rachel, we have to talk about a lot. We're going to talk about the matchups that we will actually see in the playoffs. But first, let's talk about how we got there. And we had so many questions, including, we know that the Ottawa Charge could get a win. It was a matter of if they would get a win, Rachel, and they did.
They did. You were correct, and I was incorrect in how that turned out. But I'm 100% okay with it. Let's be clear here. But I just didn't know that they had it in them, especially with Toronto fighting for that top overall spot that was still available. And the way Toronto had been playing recently, I was like, oh, like this is just going to be an uphill battle. And it was. I mean, it took overtime to do it. So, it was really close. But man, like and especially when you look at, Toronto is just getting all the shots on goal in that game. But like Ottawa pulled it out, and I thrilled for them. We're
so happy for you. I just went with the trend, Rachel. I said, listen, we've been talking about this is basically a seesaw team. They lost the last game. I'm leaning into it. They're going to get the win. And it came from only her third goal of the season from Katarzyna Mrazova. I am such a huge fan of Mrazova, Katka, as she sometimes is called, because I've said this before when Preston was on with us. I mean, she's an OG of women's hockey that doesn't get the credit that she deserves. She's played in the CWHL. She's played in the NCAA. She's played in she did actually, yes, the PHF for sure, but also the NWHL, and of course is now here with the PWHL. She is a fantastic talent, such a hard worker, and also just a great human being. So for her to get that filthy goal in overtime, I loved the call also. It was just great. We have it up on our TikTok, our TikTok channel, so you can check that out, or account. I don't know what the kids call it. Whatever. It's up on TikTok. Women's _hockey_report. and stick taps to Preston and the Czech Women's Hockey Report for having that video clipped and ready to go. Katarzyna was interviewed after the game, but this was a game where you saw some of the gamers show up. So Brianne Jenner scored for Ottawa in regulation, and Sarah Nurse scored for Toronto. We had the matchup in net. You already mentioned a lot of shots up on Ottawa. That was Gwen Phillips, as we knew it would be. And Kristen Campbell, though, returned in net for Toronto.
Yeah, and it was a tremendous goaltending duel in that game. I was just so thrilled for that. And I think that it was just one of the most exciting games of the season for sure.
Yeah, indeed. That wasn't the only action of the day. That was, of course, the first game. The second game was, I mean, I hope they like barbecue in Boston, because that's, cooked, roasted, smoked. I mean, you said yeeted before as we were coming on. All of the things. Minnesota wanted to leave, no doubt, 7 unanswered goals in an 8-1 thrashing of the Fleet.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Minnesota power play too, because they have been pretty bad all season long, right? And they pull 3 power play goals in this game. Now, was it partially that Boston was nowhere to be found? Sure. But still, Minnesota has to execute on that. And I think that was a huge thing for them. To carry that momentum into the playoffs is going to be big.
No, it's absolutely huge. And we talked about it on the last show, right, Rachel? We've seen this Minnesota team eke its way into the playoffs en route to the first ever championship in the PWHL. So now it's all bets are off, right? Now that Minnesota's in, and they put the league on notice about what they can do. I do think I wanted to talk to you about this. We talked coming out of Worlds and then going into the final week of the regular season about goaltending. We always talk about goaltending because we love goaltenders. And we talked about Erin Frankel. She does get the start here, Rachel. Was that surprising at all to you?
It was a little bit. I think, you look at what she went through at Worlds, it did not seem like she was 100%. Now, I understand, this is a must-win situation for Boston, and logic would dictate that you put Erin Frankel in just because you know what you got with her, right? And you know the level of effort that you're going to get. But at the same time, just knowing that she's not 100%, and the fact that you have Peslarova, who had a tremendous Worlds herself,
Correct.
To me, you have to at least consider it, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a few different ways to look at this. And Courtney Kessel, head coach for the excuse me, that's not real. Head coach for the Boston Fleet, not the Toronto Fleet. I don't know where that came from. She did speak to that, and Erin Frankel was cleared. And Erin Frankel, there was a follow-up asked. Courtney Kessel didn't offer this. I think it's important to just differentiate when coaches say something willingly and when they're specifically asked. But she was asked, okay, being cleared and being ready, 2 different things. Was Erin Frankel ready? She's like, I had a conversation. She seemed ready. And to your point, she did also talk about, it was Erin Frankel for the majority of those games that got us here. You go with your ace more or less speaking, you trust in them. Yeah. And so tough decision, and perhaps seeing Frankel pulled after those first 3 goals after the first period, right. Was that also maybe a part of the game plan to say, hey, you're back, you're ready, you're saying you're ready, we're going to take you on your word, and we need this game, so let's just be ready if we need to have Peslarova come in. So maybe it was a little bit of all of those things that we mentioned, but it's tough. You don't want to see a game go down like that. I think also, though, we heard a lot of accountability from the skaters, whether it was Courtney Kessel speaking, Hillary Knight and Megan Keller also spoke. And you heard multiple times from the Fleet that they just felt they, as a team, didn't show up, and they felt that they put Aaron Frankel in a bad position to start that coming off of an injury.
Yeah, I mean, that is an understatement that they did not show up.
Like 7 unanswered through 2 periods.
Yeah, and it was just like Boston could not put together a quality rush to save themselves, and clearly like that was a huge difference. Now, and I don't think Minnesota was unbeatable in that game. If Boston had just played their game more effectively and just had a little bit more jump there, it could have been competitive, I think.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Well, we have one more matchup to talk about, and we're going to do that on the other side of a quick little break here, Rachel.
An award-winning mattress can change your life. I speak from experience. It happened to me. After years of uncomfortable sleeps, I recently switched to Bear Mattress, and the results were instant. Bear Mattress is designed with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. I used to deal with night sweats, but Bear's best-in-class cooling ensures optimal temperature regulation, which prevents overheating and helps me stay comfortable all night long. Bear offers a wide variety of mattresses, but to get the right one for you, take their sleep quiz that matches you to your perfect mattress based on body type and sleep preferences. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout to get 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com. Use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
And thanks as always for tuning in here with us on the Women's Hockey Report. So much happening in the PWHL. We couldn't wait till Saturday. Games already, the playoffs starting. We weren't going to do that to you. So we're coming to you on a Tuesday, just ahead of the playoff matchups. Again, we'll talk about that. But one team we absolutely know that we will see, and we know that they took care of business and they got to pick their opponent, Montreal Victoire.
Yep. And, I think it was a pretty definitive win despite the score being 3-2. I think you saw some desperation from the Sirens toward the end, and Montreal did let up a little bit because they could. I felt like, but it was still like a very good game overall by Montreal. I think they definitely still set the tone for themselves heading into the playoffs and, did what they had to do. It didn't make a difference for New York as far as the draft order in the grand scheme. I do think that it was kind of fitting that Carpenter scored the last goal for the Sirens to end the regular season there. I think that's like a good note for the Sirens to end on. That's kind of a pun there with the wee woo, but at any rate, I think it was a obviously a better result for Montreal, but still, like, I think it gives the Sirens a little bit of hope heading into this offseason.
And we talked about it, right, on the last episode. This is a team that, despite the fact that they don't have as many wins as they'd like, that it seemed we again had Jesse Aldridge on. We had Elk Hartchi on, and both of them independently saying that, effectively, to summarize, the vibes are good. The vibes are good. It's just a matter of getting a new unit, because, right, there were some changes to that lineup. Hartchi being one of them, Carpy being out for a little bit. You're just getting Zandy Hart back into the fold. You lose Saulnier, you bring in, Taylor Girard. There were some things that they were just working out. And so vibes being good, love that. I do think, and we mentioned this on the last episode, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's some shakeups, things that happen from the coaching or executive level, because for me, I love that the vibes are good and that's important. And I do think that this is a team that they can reach a higher level with what they have on paper. They have Sarah Fillier, who tied Hillary Knight, right, in overall top scorers for the league. neither one of them in the postseason.
Right. And, there is I would say a question mark about Sarah Fillier and where she'll be next year. Obviously the Sirens have like first right of refusal here, but I have to think she'll be back, especially if they get that first overall pick and they have like just a little more juice going into next season.
Yeah, I guess I wonder, is the question just getting more juice from an offensive perspective? I mean, it's never bad to have more options, right?
Right.
And I wonder if sometimes it's like, hey, we have at least enough juice, or we think we do, but are we given the freedom, or are we set up in a structure where we can showcase that? And
Right.
I'm kind of leaning towards that this team definitely could use more juice, right? They could use, just a few more prolific scorers, and I think that they didn't quite tap out all the way on their potential.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's fair. And so a lot of, I think, really deliberate kind of things that the Sirens have to do this offseason, and just be very careful and very methodical about the order of operations and what they're doing heading into this offseason.
Yep. And I mentioned top performers with respect to points. Sarah Fillier and Hillary Knight, they end up tied there when it comes to overall top performers, in points, I should say. But when it comes to scoring, your league leader in goals, or excuse me, in goals specifically, because I just talked about scoring. Daryl Watts, also give a stick taps to Daryl for coming in with 27 points, just behind Fillier and Knight, who both had 29. But your goal scoring leader, Marie-Philip Poulin, who we will see in the postseason as part of Montreal, and they got to pick their opponent, Rachel, and
They
drum
did.
roll, who'd they go with?
They went with the Ottawa Charge, which I think it's a really interesting circumstance. Again, we saw how the picking your opponent played out last season. Not so great for Toronto, right? So I think that it was the obvious choice to make, given that Minnesota is the defending champions, and the fact that they just demolished Boston and have been kind of on a heater recently and like really stepping things up. However, Ottawa won the two most recent games between Montreal
Sure did.
and Ottawa, even though Montreal does have the overall advantage for the season at 4-2. I think, it was going to be a tough decision no matter who they picked.
Right.
But it's going to be interesting.
It is going to be interesting. And is this what Ottawa needed to tap into another level? Because we've been talking about the seesaw effect of Ottawa. And I think what you're referring to with regard to the only two wins they have in this series,
Right.
4-2 in favor of Montreal, the only two wins being the last two. And how big of an impact is momentum now that they have a little bit of that, jolt in the arm, Rachel? They got to the postseason, and they had to work really hard for it. How many chances do you need to realize that you have to buckle up in your own game before you really become a consistent team? So we don't know. we continue week after week to ask this question about Ottawa. But the reality of it is that the stakes have been raised. Of course, we're in the playoffs. This is the postseason. And sometimes that athlete edge, that competitor, comes out in a different way. Now, whether it's right or wrong and how you can manipulate that in the regular season or even on a daily basis, that's a conversation, for sports psychologists to have.
Right.
As analysts, we just want to know, is the dog going to come out on the ice? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it going to happen? And I think that's going to be interesting to see. That being said, we know that Montreal, we talked about it. Montreal got their work done early. And we know they can do it.
Yeah, they positioned themselves at the top of the table like pretty early and just had to float through the rest of the season. Now I say float, and that means play very well,
Right.
And continue to find success. But I think that, when they falter, they can really falter hard. And, I will say that, at least for me, one of the biggest determining factors in this series is going to be goaltending, right? Because obviously Anne Renee Desbiens, lowest goals against average this season at 1.86, 932 save percentage, like seemingly unstoppable, at times. And we've seen the difference between when she plays and when she doesn't play, right?
Yeah.
There is a difference there, and it's very clear. On the Ottawa side of things with Gwen Phillips, she's on this trajectory now that I would say, you look at her, like, quote unquote weaker save percentage at 919 and a 2.11 goals against average. I mean, it seems like that's great. It's so good. And she's been playing just fantastic hockey, but it's just not as good as Anne Renee Desbiens. And so it's like, is she going to carry that momentum? And is her rolling numbers going to look more like Anne Renee Desbiens when all is said and done? And I think that'll be a huge, huge part of it.
I think it's huge. And then also for those who partake in the men's hockey, I think you also have to note that, I mean, the best goaltender coming into the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs round one had probably the worst performance in round one. And you had to have your second goaltender come in and anchor that Jets team to just keep them afloat to be able to advance. Why am I mentioning that? Because you have Anne Renee Desbiens, but you also have Elaine Chuli, both that have seen time in the regular season. That's not the case because Gwen Phillips is the backup because of the injury that Emirates Mashmeyer suffered for Ottawa.
Yeah.
And so and we know this is going to be a series, we're going to talk about the schedule coming up here, but is that something that is going to be a concern? On the other hand, Gwen Phillips hasn't had as many reps, so, the wear and tear might not be the same as compared to an Anne Renee Desbiens who had to step away for a little bit because of injury. So I don't know. It can go a lot of different ways here.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we talked about earlier in the season is that Montreal was getting their scoring from across the board. And we saw, like, MPP obviously rose to the top in goal scoring as the season progressed there. But again, they just have so many different weapons. And I think, obviously Laura Stacey had a tremendous season for them as well. And Jennifer Gardner has had one of the best months of her life playing hockey. And so I feel like there's just so many options for Montreal and that are more consistent overall than Ottawa Charge scorers at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And again, it took some heroics from a player coming back from injury for Ottawa to even punch their ticket. And that is Katarzyna Mrazova, who we talked about, excuse me, at the top of the show. But coming up, Rachel, we talked about who the matchups are going to be, or at least who Montreal picked. But there is another matchup. And of course, we want to let you know when the games are. And we definitely have a familiar foe in the second grouping, right? So we want to talk about that, and we will do so coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, and each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling full longer. And personally, I love the no shells variety because I'm lazy and I don't want to shell them. But it's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. I have them at my desk sometimes when I'm working, and I just happen to have picked up a multi-pack of the sea salt and vinegar no shells because those were my favorite of all the flavors that I picked. It's so delicious and healthy too. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. These little green wonders pack a protein punch. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more.
All right, Rachel, excuse me. We talked about Montreal and their opponent, Ottawa. And we know that Minnesota is the lone U.S. team in the playoffs, and they are taking on Toronto. And where the Toronto Sceptres are at the time, PWHL Toronto, may have picked their opponent, it certainly bit them in the behind last season. Now Toronto, that is, now have to kind of own the L that they received and take on this Minnesota team who, as we talked about, really kind of undressed Boston in their last game. So I feel like the storylines, the tensions are running high. There's some history here. So who even knows what we are about to get in this particular series?
Listen, I don't know either. I think this is going to go very interestingly. Now, I think that Toronto having home ice is going to be a big deal. I think Minnesota has problems like at home, first off. So they have had trouble at home. And so if Toronto can get off to a good start and then going into Minnesota for a game 3, if they're like already ahead, that actually could work to their advantage a little bit here.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, flip that and reverse it. As you know, we heard Missy Elliott once say, you have to take this momentum that you have as Minnesota. And I think what we talked about earlier is that they were very opportunistic against Boston. Could Boston have won that game or at least scored one more goal? Yes, quite very possible. And Minnesota did not relent. They played their game. And that's what they're going to have to do against Toronto. Now, I didn't mention it in the last segment, but I do think the Montreal Ottawa series is going to be extremely physical. That we got to keep an eye on. I wonder, though, my gut is telling me that this Toronto-Minnesota series is going to be super direct, as if they want to use their speed. The team that's able to prevent breakouts and get their own is likely going to be more successul.
Absolutely. This series is going to be run and gun in a way that the other one isn't. I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think, when you look at Toronto, you look at that top line of Watts and Miller and Comfort, like anything can happen with them. But I do think the linchpin for Toronto is going to be, what's that second line going to do with Sarah Nurse and Natalie Spooner and Malte? Like, I think like that is going to be critical because they may not get the matchups that they want against the top line. So can the second line come through? And if they can, then it's almost game over because I just see like almost too much concentration in the top line for Minnesota in some ways.
Oh, I can totally see that. I think absolutely. Question for you, whether it's goaltending or the defensive pairs, who do you think has the advantage coming in?
I do think Toronto has an advantage here. I really do. I just think in terms of consistency and especially the second half of the season here, I think that they have shown like a better structure.
Yeah.
Let's say than Minnesota.
I would agree. I think they had to find it. We heard from Troy Ryan after the loss that, they felt in some ways that they had to earn this a little bit more, which I thought was such an interesting comment because they definitely had their ups and downs in the inaugural season as well. And finding their stride seemed really hard. That being said, once they did, it was like lights out, it's over for everyone else. But then we saw that wasn't enough to get through Minnesota last season. And so this is a Minnesota team that once again, I think feels like left some points on the table in the regular season, but came in strong at the exact right moment against the perfect opponent on the last game of the season, once again punching their ticket. And this is a team, baby, like we've seen the ring design, right? The banner's up. They know what it feels like to be a champion. And maybe whether there were doubts in the locker room or not, once you now get a fresh reset to do that again, that also could be very lethal for this Toronto team.
Yeah, and Minnesota won their last head-to-head 5-2, so they certainly got on the board. They own the season 4 games to 2 over Toronto, so they do know how to beat this team. It's just it's a very oil and water series to me, because it's like I feel like both teams are in a really good place here, and it's just which one is going to come out on top here, and it could be either one of them. But again, that Minnesota top line is so good.
I know.
Like, and Kendall Coyne, like, she comes through. She just
does.
comes through.
Lee Steckline has been coming through.
Oh, I know.
That's necessarily known for their offensive prowess, and has been stepping up for this Minnesota team. To me, that speaks to a little bit of not just the freedom, but also the responsibility and kind of the cohesion, the communication. I would imagine that does happen. We don't often see, it's more rare in women's hockey, if we're being honest, to have defenders who can step up responsibly in the offensive zone. And I think we can agree that Lee Steckline is more of a stay-at-home defender than, some of your more aggressive offensive defenders. But the fact that she's able to integrate fill-in slots, I think that's something also to watch. Also, I just love mentioning Lee Steckline. I think she's a great human being and friend of the pod.
She is.
That's right. The Becky Sauerbrunn of women's hockey. She has approved that nickname, or it's not really a nickname because it's not short at all, but she has approved that message. So we're going with it. And the good news is that we actually get this series on tap first, Rachel. We kick off the playoffs, Minnesota at Toronto. That's going to be tomorrow, Wednesday, May 7th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at the Coca-Cola Coliseum. As you mentioned, Toronto will be hosting. Now you can watch on Prime and also regionally in the U.S. FanDuel Sports Network. I believe that used to be Valley, right? So that is who's carrying the game. Then Thursday, May 8th, special day in my household. It's my birthday. So I get to watch Ottawa versus Montreal on my birthday. That will be on TSN. So we have Wednesday, Friday is going to be your Minnesota-Toronto series. So the Friday game, Minnesota at Toronto, will also be at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then it's Thursday, and both series will pick up on Sunday, but we will talk about that, Rachel, on Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time when we do our first ever live stream of the Women's Hockey Report. So in between the series, we will get you ready on Saturday for the 2 games on Sunday, May 11th. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Who do you think, I'm going to throw this at you before we close out. If there's one player that you think can really be an X factor for their respective team, who do you like going into the playoffs?
Like, I want to say Michaela Kava.
Ooh, Michaela Kava. Oh, I like that pick. I like that pick a lot. I like that pick. Yeah, Michaela Kava. I like it. Oh, the first person that came to mind, and I think it's a pretty straightforward question or answer, might be, I think, because she's kind of stepping into this role. Not that she hasn't done it in the last handful of games in the regular season, but I really think Gwen Phillips needs to be locked in. And we kind of talked about why, because there are just a few more, there are more options and flexibility in net for Montreal. It feels like, with experience, right? Games under their belt as compared to Gwen Phillips. And we're going to really see if she can take on what would be, right? Kind of the grind of a regular season, true 1A goaltender. I'm also low-key, I'm always rooting for Bucky. I want to see what we can see from that Montreal team, and if some of their depth players, some of the players that really play those hard minutes can come through, and if Michaela Grant-Mentis can work some magic, because she likes performing on the high stage. Doesn't always get the opportunity, but definitely loves to do that.
She really does. Yeah. I mean, I can't wait for both of these series. I think both of them could go to 5 games. Absolutely. I would probably give Montreal the edge in that series.
Yeah,
but again,
sure.
could go to 5. Man, Toronto, I have to pick Minnesota, I think.
Ooh, okay. I feel like my heart's leaning towards Minnesota. That being said, from an analysis perspective, I kind of want to see what things look like in that first game to really see what form each team is in, because I do think that it benefits each team to really come out of the gate like a shot, right? I don't think that whoever wins that series between Minnesota and Toronto is going to want to futz around. They're not going to want this series to drag out. Again, we said it's going to be a run and gun style, and I think that's how they're going to execute. Whoever wins this series, I think, is going to just want to annihilate from puck drop.
I mean, fair. I think that's the strategy I would go with too.
Yeah, absolutely. Just completely pound your opponent into the ice and keep it moving. Get a little bit of rest maybe and keep it moving. Those are my thoughts. All right. Well, we'll have so many more thoughts once we have some games in the books. The PWHL Playoffs second season starting tomorrow, again, Wednesday, May 7th, with Minnesota at Toronto. And we will be back, the Women's Hockey Report, doing a live stream Saturday. That's going to be at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday, May 10th. So again, make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell so that you know when we are going live, and follow us on TikTok at women's_hockey_report. But for Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala here, and we will catch you live on the next episode of the Women's Hockey Report to talk about all of the things. Until then, peace out, everybody.